Hey everyone, Sanjita here, and today I'm bringing you a double feature of two of my latest builds for Remnant 2, the Prismatic Tank and Infinity Genesis. We have a fair bit to cover, so let's go ahead and dive right on in. Starting off, I present to you the Prismatic Tank. This is a build that dishes out high damage while also providing us with substantial amounts of durability and recovery, allowing us to take a hit and get right back up and keep going. Archetypes are going to be the Archon with the Chaos Gate skill and Warden with the Shield Drone skill. We are using Archon for the 50% bonus to mod damage, our main source of damage, along with its 10% to mod critical chance and passive mod generation. Chaos Gate will be there to further boost our damage up to 35% at a cost of up to 15% of our damage reduction. Warden increases all damage by 25% and grants a 5% to critical chance. Our skill, Shield Drone, will bolster our defenses by applying a shield for 10% of our max health every 2 seconds until it is at full 100% shield, and refilling it whenever we take damage. It also gives us 10% damage reduction and 1 level of Bulwark whenever we are the warded target. Our armor for this set will be the Bruiser Helmet, Bruiser Chest Piece, Leto Mark II leggings, and Leto Mark I gloves. This gives us a high amount of base armor while still allowing us to at least heavy roll. For our amulet, we have the Chain Reaction. This is our crown jewel and will form the basis of our offense, which consists purely of mod damage. The amulet increases all of our mod damage by 20%, and more importantly, funnels 50% of the mod power we use into our stowed weapons mod. With this, we'll be able to maintain our mod power indefinitely by swapping back and forth as needed between weapons and using the attached mod to refill the reserves for our secondary or our stowed weapon. As far as our rings, our first three will be focused on damage. Probability Cord will boost our critical damage by 20%. Burden of the Ciolus to increase our mod damage by 15% at a cost of 20% of our maximum ammo, which we don't use anyway. And Burden of the Destroyer, which gives us another 15% increase to all damage, particularly our mods, a decrease of 35% of our firearm range, which doesn't apply to us because we're using mods. And lastly, our final ring is the Custodian's Bastion. Now, I understand the description of this says that it increases armor by 1 for every 2% of active shield with a maximum of 100 armor. However, I believe this actually may be influenced by factors such as fortitude and relic fragments slash prism bonuses. For our purposes, Bastion provides us with 1.6 armor per 2% for a maximum bonus of 80 armor at 100%. Now, note that our damage reduction also affects the damage our shield takes when it's hit, so the higher the damage reduction, the less damage it takes. Alternatively, you can opt for the Generating Band, which will regenerate 3% of your maximum health per second whenever you have a shield applied to you. For our relic, we'll be using the Profane Heart to give us an innate 3% lifesteal on hit, with all lifesteal efficacy increased by 50% on use. Personally, I can't recall ever having to actively use it. There might have been a few times where I probably could, but I really never felt the need to actually use it, so I have gone through entire Apocalypse runs and never clicked that button. Our melee weapon can be any weapon of choice, but you simply cannot go wrong with the Krell Axe and Tainted Blade Mutator. I mean, it's additional ticks of damage, plus corrosion applies a 10% damage reduction debuff to enemies, which just increases our damage by 10% at least anyway. So it's always a good choice. Our firearms are literally any gun that can accept a mod. And for this, we have two mods in particular we want to use: Prismatic Driver and Skewer 2.0. Prismatic Driver is going to be our main mod of choice and our primary source of damage. Firing at an enemy produces a steady beam of energy that also produces high damage explosions within a 3-meter AoE, while being sustained on an enemy. We're going to pair this with the failsafe mutator to increase its damage by 25% and help us prolong our usage by having a 15% chance to not consume a charge. And this actually happens pretty well, pretty consistently, so you can typically fire that for much longer than you would actually anticipate. Skewer 2.0 is our high damage reload mod. I call it a reload mod because while Skewer does inflict high damage, our primary use of it will be to refill our mod power for Prismatic Driver whenever it runs low or just runs out. With the Reaction Chain Amulet and the build's passive amounts of mod power generation, this easily allows us to set into an endless loop of lasing down enemies with Prismatic, swapping to Skewer to restore Prismatic's power whenever it's needed, and then swapping right back and continuing your lasing assault. For our traits, Fast Cast and Barrier come standard with our archetypes, no surprise there. Kinship is so that we don't severely damage or kill ourselves whenever we have an explosion go off in our face. Trust me, it's gonna happen. Fortify is for extra armor. Vigor is for extra health. Spirit is for our mod power generation to increase our mod power generation. Bark Skin is for extra damage reduction. Siphoner is for lifesteal on hit. Resolute is also for when we inevitably have an explosion go off on our face. Again, trust me, it will happen. But it's also just generally useful. I found that while this trait doesn't actually reduce or eliminate the amount of flinch or hit reaction that we have to attacks, it actually does speed up the animation of our hit reaction so that we recover a heck of a lot faster. This includes attacks that knock us down, like an explosion going off in our face, allowing us to get back up a whole lot faster. I consider this trait, along with kinship, to be a must with this build. Then we have Insight for more passive mod regeneration. And rounding out the list is Leech to increase our lifesteal efficacy. Okay, and there's a point of endurance there, but we can't help that. It comes with the archetypes. Now, as for our Prism, the Prism is split between an offensive and defensive traits. For our offense, we have Meta, giving us 15% weak point damage and 10% critical damage. Mage increases our mod damage and mod generation, both by 10%. Tank increases our damage reduction by 5% and our armor by 10%. Protected increases our shield amount by 10% and adds 15 to our base armor. And then, of course, finishing all of this out is a 7.5% mod critical chance. Our legendary perk on this is going to be Boundless Energy, which grants us infinite Nerudian energy for our shield drone. That means our drone will never run out of juice and will always be ready to refresh our shields as needed, which in turn increases our armor, damage reduction, and overall survivability. Our fragments are more damage with mod critical chance, mod damage, and critical damage. All of this put together makes for a build that can absolutely melt nearly anything that is put in front of it while surviving hits that would put most others on their knees. While we are not the absolute powerhouse of the one-shot destroyers, nor are we unkillable juggernauts, we are absolutely a force to be reckoned with in terms of output and staying power. And for our second build, this is the Infinity Genesis. This is a much more straightforward range damage hugs build designed to utilize the Genesis bow and repeatedly fire off full charge volleys as quickly as possible at all times. Now, as someone who has always enjoyed using bows in games, I absolutely fell in love with the Genesis from the first moment I checked it out. My only real hangup with it was its really long charge time. And while I understand why it was like that, I still couldn't help but be a little bit about it. So I wanted to try and come up with something to get around that. And I feel like I've done that in spades. As stated, this is a Hunter Gunslinger build that uses the Hunter's Mark and Bulletstorm for all of their usual and well-known reasons. Pretty sure that's all that really needs to be said about that at this point. We're all pretty familiar with the Hugs build. For our trinkets, we have the Worn Dog Tag as our amulet to increase our fire rate and reload speed by 15% and reduce our firearm charge time by 15%. Probability Chord is our first ring, and that's going to increase our crit damage by 20%. Archer's Crest is our second ring that increases our projectile speed by 20% and decreases firearm charge time by 25%. Offering Stone will increase our damage by 1% for 1 second every time we deal ranged damage, stacking up to 15 times. The duration is increased to 10 seconds on a kill. With our build, we can easily release full charge volleys quickly enough to increase and maintain the damage bonus. Alternatively, we can use Burden of the Destroyer for a constant plus 15% damage at a penalty of minus 35% to our firearm range. You really cannot go wrong with either one. And last but certainly not least is the Infinity Pocket, one half of our build's namesake, and the very reason why you will never run out of ammunition. Well, I say that. While it is possible to run out of ammo, you need to actively and intentionally try to run out. And I have tried. It took me way longer than I would have liked, and it's just it's just silly. But let's just say, for all intents and purposes, you functionally have infinite ammunition. Why? Because this ring will return 10% of your stowed weapons and max ammo after reloading from an empty magazine. In the case of a bow or other single shot weapons, this is after every single shot. If your stowed weapon is at full max ammo capacity, then 10% of your active weapons ammo is returned. This does not seem to be affected by anything that increases your ammo capacity, like, say, ammo reserves, and instead only returns ammunition according to the weapon's base maximum capacity. This time around, for our relic, we're going to be using the Tranquil Heart. I say that just about any relic is fine, but I tend to prefer the generally hands-off approach of Tranquil, and the benefits of it really cannot be denied. Armor choices here are going to be flexible, and you can wear whatever you feel comfortable with or you just like the look of. This round, I'm using the Technician's Helmet, Red Widow Chest, and the Crimson Guard Boots and Gauntlets. I saw this setup in another creator's video once, and I really liked the aesthetics of it, so I went with it. And we're light enough to mid-roll, so bonus. Especially for me, since I tend to flaunt around the bruiser set all the time, and I'm used to heavy rolling. Your melee weapon, again, is of your choice, and as I said before, you really cannot go wrong with the Krell Axe with Tainted Blade. But, again, feel free to flavor this particular slot with your taste. Our firearms are going to be the Genesis Bow for our long gun, which is the other half of our namesake. This is our main weapon, and we'll generally have in our midst most of the time. The bow can release 1 to 5 energy arrows, depending on how long you charge it, which with our build is very fast. Individually, the damage per arrow is less than other bows, but when fired in volley, the damage adds up really quickly. And they're released quickly enough in succession that most, if not all, of the full volley will generally hit whatever you're aiming at. The mod Mega Drive will mark your target with entanglement, which causes all of your Genesis projectiles to seek the entanglement target after the initial impact, dealing 35% of the main fire damage. While these secondary hits cannot crit on their own, the damage they inflict is based off of the damage from the initial hit. So critical hits and or weak spot hits will affect the secondary hit damage. Note that if your target dies while the mod is still active, you will need to select a different target by pressing the mod button to continue its usage. For the mutator, we're going with the supercharger. 30% charge time and plus 15% crit chance on charge shots. I'm pretty sure that's enough said. Our handgun for this setup will be the Enigma. When it comes to clearing basic enemies and ads, very few weapons excel at this as much as the Enigma does. I mean, when you're being assaulted by multiple small enemies, the Enigma will typically clear them out in short order and very efficiently. Do I really need to go on with this one? Extender will be our slotted mutator. This will increase our magazine size from 25 to 36, while also increasing our reload speed by 20%. However, feel free to swap this one out for something else if you prefer any other kind of mutator. Our traits are going to be as follows. Long shot and ammo reserves are from our archetypes, which increase ideal range and ammo reserves, respectively. Though it is a bit sad that the latter of these two ends up being functionally useless for us. But whatever. Regrowth is for passive health regen, Fortify for armor protection, Triage for increased healing efficiency, Vigor for extra health, Spirit for mod generation, Bark Skin for physical damage reduction, Siphoner for lifesteal, Leech for better lifesteal, Expertise to get our skills back just a little bit faster, and 2 points of endurance that just naturally comes with the build. Now, on to our Prism setup. This one is mostly a standard range damage configuration, so pretty straightforward. Sniper for range damage and increased range, Meta for weak spot and crit damage, Gunslinger for fire rate and reload speed, and munitions for crit chance and ammo reserves, which is kind of wasted on us, but it was either that or reduced heat generation. Admittedly, reduced heat generation would have made this prism pretty useful for such weapons, but hindsight, what are you going to do? And to round it off is firearm charge time. For fragments, we will be using crit damage, firearm charge time, and range crit chance. And our legendary perk will be Sharpshooter to increase our range damage by 60%. Honestly speaking, I just started off wanting to make this build that let me use a Genesis and a bit of rapid fire style. What I ultimately ended up with is something that was a bit beyond my expectations and carried me through an apocalypse campaign run with relatively few hiccups. Truthfully, my biggest troubles in longest fight ended up being with the hatchery boss. Not that it was particularly difficult, it's just that with a largely single target focused bow build and a lot to deal with at any given time, and that little sucker being quick on its feet, all however many of them that thing has, it just made for an annoyingly long fight. And the Labyrinth's Cube boss. Doable, but after getting clobbered right at the end with one weak point to shatter, I swapped the bills just for that one.